Morning, America. This is Justin at Seeking Context, speaking today with Eve Berry, who is the author of Building True Community, 30 Years Down the Road Less Travel, and a community builder and a grant writer. And we're going to learn about the world of nonprofits and the world of building community. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today, Eve.
Well, thanks for having me, Justin.
I wanted to start out by asking if you could just tell me a little bit about your work today and what your career is like as a community builder and a grant writer and a grant educator.
Sure. I've been working with nonprofits and communities, and actually community building since, believe it or not, the late 1960s. And That was when I first got involved with community organizing and prevention programs and funding and grants. I got my first grant in 1972 and then ended up teaching people how to write proposals and get grant funding all over the country and internationally for quite a while, and then ended up being a consultant to both businesses and nonprofits and governmental agencies in planning and team building and group effectiveness and capacity building and all that, program development, evaluation. So I've had a very eclectic and varied career as a consultant. I've had my own business since 1978, and by the grace of God or something, I have never had to market. And so projects just kind of come to me. So,
That's great. What kind of
yeah.
projects are you working on today?
Well, today I'm working on starting up a grant for a Native American tribe, the Nisenan tribe in Northern California. They received funding for a youth prevention, substance use disorder prevention, positive lifestyle, healthy lifestyles program, actually through the cannabis tax in California that is going back to the tribe. I'm also working on a capital campaign for a Frank Lloyd Wright historic site in Western New York. I'm working on another federal grant to deal with trauma and adverse childhood experiences in Connecticut. I'm teaching community health worker training again, starting in January, and working with child care providers, family child care providers as little small businesses in Hartford, Connecticut. So that's kind of a sampling of the things I'm involved with right now. So,
Right. No retirement for Eve Berry.
well, I keep thinking about it, but it's kind of, wait, this is going the opposite way.
Right, right. You're just adding more to your plate over
Well,
time.
you know what? Justin, you know this from our conversations, but my work doesn't feel like work.
Hmm.
So it just feels like, oh, I'm learning and this is what I'm doing right now and
Right,
writing. So it doesn't feel like work to me. It feels like kind of just a creative space. I'm not really, I don't work, I'm an artist in a way, but I don't work with paint and, clay or anything like that. I work with people and process and ideas and writing and
right. Well, for a person like me that's relatively new to the world of nonprofits and inexperienced in writing grants, when you're teaching people how to write grants, what does a person need to know that is new to this field?
well, I think the main thing is that when you're writing grants, you're not just filling out forms. It's not just check boxes and paperwork. You're basically finding a way to communicate what your vision is for the program. Now, to do that, what you have to do is have discrete discrete elements because every grant proposal asks you certain questions. They may be a little bit different, but they all boil down to the same things. They want to know what is the problem you're addressing. And the problem is the current condition. Not what you want to do about it, that's the method. But that's a mistake people often make is they say, well, the problem is a lack of youth services. No, the problem is kids are struggling. They're experiencing depression and social isolation. They're having trouble at home. They're having a hard time keeping up with their grades or whatever it is. That's what is the problem. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to think about and articulate and document what the problem is. You've got to then say, okay, if we fix the problem or if we improved it, well, how would those kids be different? Those are the goals and objectives. But then, of course, you get to the main part of it, which is how are you going to do that? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? Where are you going to do it? And then you have to say, okay, and how are you going to know if you've done it or not, which is the evaluation.
Right.
Data collection, documentation of what you are doing so that you can both enjoy the success of that and communicate it, but also have accountability to the funding source. And then, of course, you have to say, oh, and what is this going to cost?
Right. So
it's basically about your organization. Why should I fund you to do this? What's your track record? I always call it like an organizational resume. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are your creds, Is this the first thing you've ever done? Why should I invest in your organization with this grant? So that's the organizational information. Then the problem statement, and then there's goals and objectives or outcomes or whatever they call it. And then there's methods, and then there's evaluation. There's usually one other piece people have to think about, which is, I call it the uh-oh section, which is future funding or sustainability, which is at the end of the grant, how are you going to keep it going? That's why I say it's uh-oh, what are we going to do? And the answer is not, we're going to get another grant. Even though that may be what you actually do, that's not the thing to say. How are you going to build it into your operating budget? So there's that piece in there, and then there's the budget, and then stuff. So that's in a nutshell.
Right. And if I'm an organization that doesn't have a history of writing grants, when do we think about bringing in a consultant and bringing in some outside help to do this, or whether we should just try and learn it on our own and go about it by articulating doing the best we can do with the people that happen to be working at the organization?
Well, I think it really boils down to the readiness of the organization, and if there are people who want to kind of learn it on their own, people can go to training. I think the best teacher is experience, and I would always recommend that people start out with something small, something local, something that is, I call it low-hanging fruit, something that doesn't require a big 50-page application, but something that is much shorter, maybe a foundation request or a community foundation request to do something that's either already being done and you have some experience with, or a new program that is addressing some kind of a need that hasn't been tackled in the community. So I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think that a good grant consultant doesn't do it for you. Basically, at least this is my idea of it. I'm sure others would say otherwise, but I go in when I work with a group and I basically am a facilitator. I know the questions to ask, and then I listen and listen and listen. That's where my community building skills come in handy, is I always do what I call unpack people. I just ask the questions that I know need to be spilled out and then put on paper in order to describe the program. That's exactly what happened with this grant I was just mentioning that I'm working on here today, this week. in terms of what's going on with the tribal kids. Talk to me about the tribal kids. And then, so I think that's the way to do it. If you hire somebody who listens and works with you to develop a program, an idea, and get it from people's heads onto paper, which a lot of people just don't know how to do. It's not rocket science, it's more logic and clear communication. So, and then also, I think a good grant consultant builds the capacity of the organization to do it for themselves. Yeah, it's like you're educating along the way. So maybe they never go to a training, but my client I'm working with here, she had some other small grant and she had to do some kind of a report. And she goes, "Oh, I'm so excited." But it was like the final report for some project they had. She goes, "A year ago, I would have been totally freaked out by this. But because we've been working together and I've been learning how we, and working together with you, I had confidence I could do the report." So it's that kind of stuff. So people learn by doing if you work with them side by side. So
Must be rewarding.
it's very rewarding to see.
Cool. And I wanted to ask about, you said listening is an important part of community building. Can you talk about the world of community building and this book that you've written recently on building true community?
Sure. I guess my interest in community building happened very early on, which really does tie back to the grant piece. It's the first grant I ever developed. I had no idea what I was doing. Was in Bloomington, Indiana, and it was for a weekend community for youth. And today they call young people at-risk youth, which I think is a terrible label. It may be true, but we called them kids who were starting to get in trouble. That's what we called it in those days. And so I was on a city drug commission as a member, and we just put together this application to bring kids together for 16 consecutive weekends and live in community and learn positive skills, communication, problem solving, leadership, etc. And we got 3 years of funding from Lilly Endowment. So very early on with the community organizing and this community weekend project, I got interested in what happens, what's the power of a group? How does a group create an environment, a healthy group? How does a healthy group create an environment, a container, if you will, for people to grow and flourish and heal themselves, basically, or, strengthen who they are? And so I ended up getting involved in facilitation in the mid 70s when nobody knew what a facilitator was, learned about facilitation. And that's, I guess, and I ended up doing lots and lots of facilitation. And then I noticed that what would happen would be if you do that kind of listening and you capture what people are saying in a group, all the conflict at some point shifts. I said, how did that happen? And it was kind of magic, and the group would come together in a way and really be productive and work well. And it looked like magic to me. And so the way I finally, and then I would just keep doing that. And I stumbled into one of Scott Peck's books, probably in the mid 80s. And he had written The Road Less Traveled, which was on the bestseller list for 13 years. And I found this book, which happened to be People of the Lie on the Hope for Healing Human Evil, was his second book. And it really saved my life because I was dealing with some very difficult, dark people in one of my consulting situations. And it really put everything in perspective for me. So I went and I heard him speak in Connecticut. And he spoke about this thing he had just started doing called the Foundation for Community Encouragement, which was And he was describing the community building process, which is a simple process where people sit together. They could be people who know each other, people who don't know each other. And the group goes through these pretty predictable stages. And if they enter into this kind of open place where people get authentic and real and are able to show their vulnerability, be themselves, all of a sudden the group shifts, becomes a body, a connected body. It was very cool. So it took me a while, but I ended up connecting with that group in Tennessee where they were at the time, got deeply involved, and that was in the like I don't know, 2 or 3 years after they started. And I've been involved with it ever since. So we've done community building circles literally all over the world, trained facilitators. And then I guess what I've done mostly over the last decade or so is take the principles of community building, the practices of community building, the skills, and integrate them into the work I do, share those with the groups I work with. So I see the community building process sitting in that circle with 30 to 50 people for 2 days as a laboratory where people learn how to do it. And what good is a laboratory? What good is a petri dish or a lab if the results of that research never goes to market? So I'm kind of, my idea of it is that you bring it out into your life. You learn it and then you bring it out into your life. And that's kind of what the book is about, is what is the process? What does it look like? What are the stages? How do you facilitate it? How do you apply it? And what else, what does community building connect to? This isn't the only thing that builds community. There are all kinds of ways of building community. So how does this relate to the edges of what's in science? Quantum mechanics, the physics, and the intersection of spirituality and science, So that's kind of the last part of the book, is exploring that.
Right. Can you describe your experience and observations with the digital online Zoom community building workshops that you've been part of, and how that is different from the experience of the workshops that sort of became famous when the FCE was growing and when Scott Peck was sort of in his groove?
Yeah, good question. Well, we really never even considered the possibility of, could this be done virtually on Zoom, until the pandemic. And of course, the world changed in about a month and people went to virtual, and all these workshops that were going on in person had to, either you didn't do the workshop or, hey, could we try it? And so, quite to our surprise, it was pretty effective. Different. I think there is a phenomenon that happens when you're in physical presence with people. So if you're with people, when there's a break, you can talk with people, you can not just build relationships and connections in the circle, but we always say in community building is going on all the time. During the breaks, when you go to sleep,
Mm-hmm.
over meals. So that's missing. So you don't have that. But there are some advantages to the virtual because people don't have to deal with the logistics of travel and the expense of going, flying from wherever, hotel and everything. So in some sense, it makes it more accessible to people. When we do the community building, there's one coming up in January on the Martin Luther King weekend, whatever that is, the January 14 and 15, 13, 14, 15.
Mhm.
And we have people from all over the world. We have people from Australia, we have people from other part, just Canada, US. So it makes it a lot easier for people to come together from wherever. I think it's a little harder because you don't have, if I, let's say you're going through something in a circle and you connect to something that comes up for you and you express it and you share, and there's some connection to what you're saying and it touches something in me, I may have the impulse to comfort you, or give you a hug, or you, how do you do that on Zoom? It's not the same.
Right.
So that piece is different, but I can say that I've been a part of a ongoing community building group that meets every Sunday. You were involved with that for some time, so I think I'm not sure if we met there or in the bigger Zoom, probably in the bigger Zoom.
Yeah, I think so.
But that group has an extraordinary sense of community, and it's
Mhm.
all on Zoom.
Right.
And we have people from Australia. One of our participants, he kind of moves around a lot. He was in Korea for a month, and then he was in Italy for a month, and then now he's back in New Jersey. So that's pretty cool. So
Right. Well, and if people are interested in potentially participating in a community building workshop online, what's going to happen? Can you just describe what they could expect at this seminar that's going to be hosted in February, for example?
yeah, usually what happens because of Zoom, it's a little harder for people to stay in sitting in front of a computer for as long periods as you would sitting in a circle in a room.
Mhm.
So when we do it if we were to do a weekend community building in person, we would go from 9 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday, and then with breaks and lunch and stuff. But that's what we would do. There might be a Friday evening session. There might be a third day if the group wants to debrief what happened during the experiential part of it. But typically it's 2 full days. When we do the virtual, there's a little bit shorter sessions. We usually do Friday night for a couple hours. And then I want to say maybe 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon with a couple hour break. And so the sessions are broken up a little bit. What happens at the beginning is people show up. There are 2 facilitators that are trained by the Foundation for Community Encouragement, and very experienced. And what they do is they describe the simple guidelines that we use with community building. They're not a whole lot, they're pretty simple. And unlike what people often think about going to a workshop or a seminar or a webinar, there's no agenda, there are no presentations, there's no PowerPoints, there's no teaching. It's purely an experiential process where by using the guidelines, the group, whoever that group is, figures out by trial and error mostly, how do we build a sense of community? And by using the guidelines about being present, speaking personally, only speaking when you're moved to speak and not speaking when you're not moved to speak, being inclusive, avoiding exclusivity, some simple guidelines. people figure out, how do they do that? And so over the course of 2 days, uh, the group usually goes through pretty predictable stages that actually you see in life all the time. We just don't know we're seeing it.
Hmm.
Where where you start out with kind of being general and polite and specific and surfacey and small talk and
This is pseudo community.
yeah, pseudo, we call it pseudo community, right? And
Yeah.
then eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, somebody takes issue with something and there's a difference that surfaces. Oh, really? And then that's when we move into what we call chaos. And usually what happens in chaos is when the focus is on you. Justin, you know what? I know it's the holiday time, but you really have to wear a red shirt, and have a poinsettia in the background. I mean, it's kind of a jerky thing to do. I'm just playing with
Yeah.
you.
I'm putting the holidays in your face.
Yeah, and so what happens is people get very aware of, hopefully, how judgmental they are and how they're trying to fix other people and teach other people and give advice, none of which works.
Hmm.
And certainly it doesn't create a sense of community and connection. So during the chaos phase, the focus is really on the other, what the other should be doing.
Hmm.
And um, and so we always say to people, you know what, you cannot, and the group also tries to organize its way into community. Well, why don't we break in smaller groups, or why don't we fix the lighting, or why don't we up the temperature, or whatever it is. But you can't organize your way into community. And so what we're trained as facilitators to do is to kind of point the way to the critical piece, which is the I think the passage from chaos into community, and we call that emptying and emptiness. Which then is okay. What are the barriers that I'm holding that keeps me from connecting and being authentic with you,
Hmm. Right.
Let go of, call it whatever you want. Let go of, empty, release, surrender, die to. And it's pretty extraordinary when people enter into that place. And so often, the kinds of things that people empty, some people might call it confess. I don't know. It's reveal, speak to, are things that maybe are from their past, something that happened that they didn't even realize they were carrying, sorrow or grief or anger. Or it might be, what, I realized that 2 hours ago or yesterday when you said something, I was really offended by it, but I didn't say anything. I just kind of avoided you, didn't want to look at you. So it might be something that happens in the group. And that's really some of the most powerful community building, is to build community with the people there sitting in the circle, or in this case, in the virtual squares.
Hmm.
So for me, it really has gotten very simple. It really is about people discovering the power of just being authentic and vulnerable, and neither of which society is very supportive of. But it's liberating. One of the people in our group, uh, she said, she said the other night something I actually wrote down, which is being authentic is a superpower.
Instagram doesn't encourage it.
No. So I mean, I have seen a pretty significant retreat away from community just overall with the social media, Facebook. They actually do a study. I'm not sure who does the study, but every decade, and they measure empathy in, I think, 18 to 24-year-olds or something like that. And they've been doing it since the 50s. And starting about 20 years ago, empathy in young people took a significant dive and has stayed there.
Right. And the pandemic, the isolation didn't, in some ways, it made it worse.
So people are kind of desperate to connect. And how did they connect? With TikTok and, you know, Facebook posts and selfies
Right.
and, you know.
Well, and I guess I'm curious in your writing and your experience with both virtual and in-person community building. If I've been to some of these workshops and I've had the experience, and I realize I want community in my life, how do people take what they might have learned there, or if they haven't been to a workshop, how can you move towards it in your day-to-day life?
Well, I actually have a chapter in my book that really breaks down what community looks like in day-to-day life at different levels, individually, in your family, in your community, in the workplace. And so I think one of the ways that is really helpful to bring it back is to start noticing the stages. So what stage is my family in? What stage is my organization in? What stage is my community in? So I think let's just start with our country. The last period, whatever the period, however long you want to count that, particularly the last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, it's pretty clear how divided the country is, how much conflict there is, how much isolation people have felt. And so I think we've been in a pretty strong period of pretty severe chaos for a while. I think, unfortunately, many businesses, many organizations are in some stage of chronic chaos. I think lots of families are in chaos. We talk about dysfunctional families. Well, that's chaos, Call it drama, call it whatever you want, but it's chaos. And so I think that's where I like to start, is with the family and the workplace. We spend 80% of our working hours in our lifetime at work. And we spend most of the rest of it with our families. So I think that's the place to start. How do I be real? How do I tell my truth in my family?
Mm-hmm.
And I am very fortunate that I have relationship with my children, my grown children, with my ex-husband. That doesn't even feel like I should call it ex-husband. That sounds kind of, I don't know, negative or something. I'm starting to call him my husband. My husband, because, we've been divorced for a long time, but we still love each other. We see each other all the time. We are co-grandparenting. He goes on vacation, so we've been able to get through whatever chaos happened, whatever hurt happened, whatever alienation happened during our chaos, and have been able to, if you will, empty all that. And we have community, and we can sit around the table with my daughter and my son-in-law, my ex, or was, and we can talk about anything.
Mm-hmm.
Anything. My son lives, farther away. I don't have it, but same way with them. So And I know that a lot of people don't have that.
Right. Do you think that there was something you did intentionally that led to a divorce? Anytime you divorce, there's some sort of chaos and conflict. That how you were able to come back into a caring relationship with someone that you had conflict with in the past?
Well, I think a pivotal thing for me was, I don't want to get into a whole lot of the details of it, but uh, I wasn't the one that decided to end the marriage. He did, and it was sudden. And there was, I certainly felt hurt, and some things had happened that I was carrying a lot of sense of betrayal and, you know, uh, pain around. And, and I just pushed it down. I pushed my anger down. I pushed all of that down. And I was actually facilitating, I was facilitating a community building at Omega Institute. Scott Peck was, we did like a 4-day community building. We had about 100 people. We had 2 different community building groups. And then in between, Scotty would talk about community building as a spiritual practice. So the whole group would come together. So it was a pretty powerful setting. So here we are. I'm facilitating, and something happens where somebody makes a comment to me at the end of a break.
Mhm.
And all the stuff I'd been pushing down, that I'd been holding on to, erupted. And this is why we co-facilitate, because there are times, if you're facilitating, you basically are holding the group. You're not, you don't talk a lot, you don't share a lot until the group comes into community, then you can. But that's why we have 2. I said to my co-facilitator, I said, I have to speak. So, and all of this came out, right? All the story, the things that I was holding on to, the grief, everything. And that created like a chain reaction. So whatever I was sharing about, somehow that touched other people's experiences. So you have this kind of collective thing of people emptying similar kinds of things that I'd gone through. And there happened to be a young Methodist minister in the circle. And, he kind of witnessed and, watched all of that. And at the very kind of end of the day, he said, "Would you all like to have a service?" So our whole group went down to the lake and went into the water together. So it was like a ritual kind of thing.
Impromptu.
It was totally impromptu, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And the group was so connected. And I'm telling that story because that was really probably the beginning point of me being able to let go of all the pain and reconnect. We have 2 children together, that will never change. So that was a really important piece. I don't think that would have ever happened if I hadn't been involved in community building. I probably would have been bitter and, resentful and feel like a victim and all that for a very long time.
If I can ask a personal question, did you then reach out to your husband? And was it because of things that you did that you were able to rebuild that relationship? Or
well, we never really sat down and had a difficult conversation where we mended the fences or anything. I think it more had to do with I was in a different frame of mind, and so my relationship with him changed because I wasn't hostile. I wasn't distant. I I was kind of back to how we were when we were together, but in a more real way. So,
But you got there yourself, not because of anything he did.
no, not really.
Yeah.
Although it became pretty clear to me that he had done his own soul searching, and he had been involved in the community building. We were involved in it together until we split up, and then he wasn't anymore, so he didn't continue. Pardon me. He didn't continue to be involved as I did, but he had already gotten the benefit of understanding, how to empty and how to let go of things, and he's changed significantly, also, so.
Well, you talked about that you co-facilitated, or you were at that particular seminar was with Scott Peck, and there's someone in the one group that we were in that says, "Don't ever meet your heroes." And I'm curious, having read The Different Drum and The Road Less Traveled, the largeness of Scott Peck is pretty big for me personally. I'm curious if you can talk about your relationship with him and how his, teachings and learnings influenced your outlook on life.
It's a big question. I met him first at that lecture, and it was just the guy up on the stage, and it was cool. And then I wrote to the foundation, and then one thing led to another. I ended up in Tennessee, and they were there, and I literally got in the car one day, drove over to Knoxville from Nashville, and said, "How can I help?" And pretty immediately, I went to a workshop right away, and I happened to meet the chair of the board, who used to be Scotty's assistant, and we connected, and so I kind of went from going to a workshop to getting deeply involved, because Marianne Schmidt, recognized my experience and that I was a good fit with them. So I got involved pretty early in the organization, and that's when I met Scotty. And so I was the chair of this thing called the National Committee, which was the fundraising group, major donors for the organization. And so Scotty and Lily were part of that. So I ended up back in Connecticut. They were in Connecticut. And so and we would have board meetings. We'd have board meetings 4 times a year. And these weren't hour-long board meetings. These were 3-day board meetings. And so there was a lot of opportunity to both build community, do the organizational work, be friends, hang out. So my relationship with Scotty was both professional and friendship because of all of that. And, I was up at their house many times, and I remember when he was he was very ill and close to death, and I got a call, said, "You need to come up." And so I went up, and so I'm not sure I would agree with that statement, never meet your heroes, because he was such a wise person. And like all of us as human beings, we all have our flaws, But just because you're a famous author doesn't mean you can't have flaws, Mm-hmm. And so I never took, I never kind of bought into all of that stuff. I remember it was pretty funny. I used to carry around this little journal. I'd write my notes, and we were at a workshop one time and hanging out in the hospitality suite that one evening or whatever. And he says, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, it's my journal." He says, "Let me sign it." So So he signed whatever it was in my little journal in the front. And he said, he signed it as your fellow prisoner in community, which, which, is just the paradox. He was big into paradox. How can you be a prisoner in community, which is like living in bliss? But once you kind of taste community and once it kind of grabs hold of you and you understand that living with a sense of community and connection to yourself and others is really what, to me, it's kind of like heaven on earth.
One of the paradoxes I think that I've observed in community building is that, at least in his writing, Scott Peck is a professed Christian, and I think you, in your book, talk about the spiritual nature of community building, and yet he has an approach that you try and you can be in community with an atheist or a Buddhist, even though you have a spiritual belief. Can you describe your feelings on that paradox and how, or really just whether or not a spiritual approach is necessary to be in a great community space with others?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's what I experience with community building is that there's something about it where it allows one to touch what I would call universal truths that transcend the different philosophical or theological beliefs. And so if you zoom way out and you look at the all kind of world religions and the fundamental principles embedded in those, they all have a lot in common. They have a lot of specific differences, but many of the things really all boil down to the same thing. And there's something about the community building experience that touches that. And we thought when we first started doing this, gee, is this an American phenomenon? Nope. We've done it all over the world, and there is something profoundly universal. I remember I went to Japan one time thinking, oh, this is going to be tough with the norms of the Japanese, the cultural, saving face, at least my, basic and perhaps wrong understanding of the culture. But I have never seen a group yearning so much for human connection as in that Japanese experience.
And they found it?
So I think there's something, somehow it transcends the religious beliefs. Even that, and Scotty was very Christian, but he didn't start out that way. He became a Christian by, I think, through the community building process, hanging out with some people that were Christians. He had a spiritual director who had been Jewish and became a Episcopal nun.
Really?
Yeah. So she was raised Jewish, so some very interesting transformative things happen. I think that community building is the wrong word, but a cauldron for personal transformation. And it accelerates personal transformation. I think it is an acceleration toward what Maslow talks about as self-actualization. And I also hypothesize that a group that is in community building, not in community building, a group that has entered into a sense of community I think it's kind of a state of consciousness, is a group self-actualized, kind of group at its best groupness, just as self-actualization is a person at their full humanness. So it's a mystery. I don't know if that's true. There's been some research that was done that the one thing that seems to be different about the community building experience from other, let's say, workshops or educational experiences things. You know, you go to something, you go, oh, wow, and then it kind of fades away afterwards.
Mhm.
There's something about community building that the research showed that it grows over time. It's like a seed is planted that grows. So the certainly that's been my experience is that the effects become cumulative. They don't. It's not like a light that goes on and then goes off.
Do you think that the chaos that we discussed earlier in the country at large, in the world at large, uh, are there glimmers of hope for community and group actualization in a country that's divided?
I'm not real hopeful about it at the moment. I don't. I think that at the macro level, that the I'm just going to call it the belief systems are so deeply ingrained, and they are so focused on exclusivity, the other. You know, that this group or that group is right. You know, I'm right and you're wrong, kind of thinking, and people are pretty attached to those beliefs. And when you really do community building, you've got to be willing to look at everything.
Mm-hmm.
Empty. I mean, you know, you've got to self-examine. You've got to say what's true. You know, is this belief true? Is this thing that I think these set of lenses I've been looking through, are those real? Or is that something I've adopted and absorbed to protect myself or to make myself look good? Or so it's I don't think community building is for everybody. I think it's really hard. It's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires the capacity to self-examine and to be willing to let go of things that you've held on to deeply. And I think
Yeah.
it's really hard for people. So I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think there is a lot of community building type things going on in many ways, in many places. But I don't think it's reached any kind of a critical mass from a societal perspective. I think for me, it's very much tied to democracy, and so to me, democracy and community building are kind of kissing cousins. You know that they're kind of cut out of the same cloth, and oppressive systems, autocratic, you know, dictatorial systems are different. It's a different paradigm, and it's not democracy. You
Right.
know, we got a war going on, and you know, with Russia and Ukraine. You know, you've got all these things going on between the countries. You know, the North and South Korea, and North Korea, and whatever, and China, and on and on. You know, I don't follow it all that closely, but it seems pretty divisive
Mm-hmm.
at that level
Right.
to me. So
Well, if people in this democratic country want to get their teeth wet, or that's not the right word, if they want to, you know, see if community building is for them and they want to get involved, how can they find out about this workshop that you're having in February?
Um, well, I'm not sure the best way to do this. I think you might be able to provide a link.
Mm-hmm.
There's one of my dear friends and colleagues from FCE has been doing these workshops in Chicago. We were doing them in person. He's been kind of at it forever. You know, he got involved before I did, so we're old timers at this point. John Schuler, and I can send you the link, you know, the information. Maybe you can post it, you know, if people are interested.
Yeah, we'll provide, if you give me that link, we'll provide it on the Seeking Context website with this episode.
Good.
Cool. And if people want to read your book, they can buy it on Amazon, Building True Community. And is there an audiobook out?
I don't think they've done the audiobook. No. There's an ebook. There's an ebook, and there's the book. But
Right, right.
I got my first royalty check, so
All right. You're a real author. Is this the first book you've written?
it's the first book I've published.
Okay.
I've written another book. I'm writing a series of murder mysteries, all based in nonprofits.
Well, nonprofits have conflict.
Well, there's lots of drama in nonprofits too.
Yeah, there's plenty.
Lots of chaos.
All right. Well, Eve Berry, I've been speaking with Eve Berry today, the author of Building True Community, 30 Years Down the Road Less Traveled, and a community builder. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your world, the world of nonprofits, the world of grant making or grant writing, and the world of community building. I think we could all stand to do a little bit more of that.
Thank you, Justin.